Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about my top 5 favorite books with one honorable mention that I read in 2021. My honorable mention is still one of my favorite reads. I also have a really hard time picking favorites, but the reason that I'm not including it in my top 5 is because it's a Cassandra Clare book. I love Cassandra Clare books so much. She writes the Shadowhunters series, if you're not familiar with it, but essentially she puts out a new book at least every year, and her books are pretty much always going to be my favorites, so I feel like it's a little bit unfair for me to continuously put her in my top 5, especially because she's already so very popular. She really doesn't need me hyping her up. So with that said, my honorable mention goes to Chain of Iron, the second book in the Last Hours saga. I love it so much. I love the characters, I love the romance, and I even love the problems that are going on in the Shadowhunter worlds, which tends to be where I am less excited about it. If you don't know what Shadowhunters is, basically it's our world, except there are demons in it, and there are these people, the Shadowhunters, who have angel blood in their veins, and so they fight the demons and keep the mundanes, those who can't see the demons but frequently get murdered from them, they ideally keep them from being murdered more often. And then there are also downworlders, which is kind of a blanket term for vampires, werewolves, warlocks, and fairies. The Shadowhunter Chronicles is probably my favorite series. I adore it. Look at how beautiful this cover is. A lot of people complained about it, but I think it's gorgeous. Cassandra Clare just gets better and better with each book. Cordelia is definitely my favorite main character of all the Shadowhunter Chronicles so far. So if you haven't picked up the Last Hours books, but you are generally a fan of the other Shadowhunters books and you just haven't picked this one up yet, I definitely highly recommend it. The one downside is that this one is going to have a larger gap between the second and third books release dates, I think due to COVID. Chain of Iron came out in March of 2021, but the last book, Chain of Thorns, will not be coming out until I think November of this year. So if you want to hold off, that totally makes sense too. And now on to my other top 5 favorite books. These aren't going to be in any particular order because I'm incapable of choosing a number 1 favorite. So I'm just going to kind of list them in the order which I happen to have them stacked. Number 1, we have Iron Heart by Nina Varela. This is the second book in the Crier's War duology, and it is a sapphic romance. I guess it's a fantasy. No, it's definitely a fantasy. But it's a fantasy with like science fiction vibes. So it's about this world where you have humans and then also the automata, which are basically like androids. So they are crafted beings. They are created, but they look like humans for the most part. There are a couple of things that allow you to tell them apart. Like if you look into an automata's eyes, it will like flicker. Like if there's light shining in them, there's something reflective where you can kind of see that they're an automata, but they can pass for each other pretty easily, especially if they attempt to be in disguise. Maybe not easily, but they can pass for each other. It's possible. So this book follows Crier, who's an automata. She's the daughter of the king, and she's engaged to get married to this guy, Skyer Keenock, maybe Sire, I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyway, he tells her that there's something wrong with her design. She has a flaw, and that's really where the book picks up. Then there's also the other point of view, which is a human character. Her name is Isla, and she is a rebel against the automata because they killed her family. So it has that classic overthrow the government type vibes, except it's sapphic. There are magical androids, and one of the POVs is from the magical android perspectives. I really loved this. I thought the voice was quite fresh. I really loved Crier as a character. Obviously, I said Iron Heart, which is the second book in the series, the duology. I felt like the ending was super satisfying, and to me it was really obvious that, or at least I felt like Nina Varela got more comfortable in her writing skills over the course of the book, so everything flowed a little bit nicer. It really kept me engaged the entire time. I absolutely loved it, and I would highly recommend. The next book that I absolutely adored in 2021 is one that you have almost certainly heard of if you follow book social media at all, and that would be This Is How You Lose the Time War. This book was written by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. They wrote it together. My understanding is that each one wrote one of the dual perspectives that the book is from. But the voices are so lush and similar in their lushness that it's really surprising to me that they could gel so easily. But this book is sapphic as well, and it is a science fiction. It's really hard to explain what it's about, even if you have read it, possibly especially if you have read it. Essentially, it's about two warring factions, and these two factions move throughout time and change things in the time stream so that one of them will eventually be the victor. So throughout this, you have Red, who works for one side, and Blue, who works for the other side, and they start writing each other letters. And so once again, we have an enemies to lovers sapphic romance, which is apparently everything that I need in a book. And so I really adore this one. The writing style was so strange and so beautiful. I was captivated by it. It felt like a dessert for my brain. I don't know how else to put it. I loved it so much. This is definitely going to be one that I reread several times, especially because it was very confusing, but just so enjoyable. I cannot recommend This Is How You Lose the Time War enough. The next book on my list of favorites from 2021 is The Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White. I had this book on my bookshelves for a while because I have read some other books by Kiersten White and I really enjoyed them. And I am also a big fan of Arthurian legend and retellings of Arthurian legend, especially from a more feminist perspective. So I was super excited to check that out. It did not disappoint. I read this one really recently, so I'm still really fired up about how much I loved it. But essentially, it's from Guinevere's perspective as she goes to Camelot and marries King Arthur. However, in this retelling, she is a changeling, which means she has magic, and magic is banned in Camelot right now. Arthur has sent Merlin away, and all forms of magic are completely illegal, except he knows that she does magic, and she has been sent here to protect him from some kind of magical threat that Merlin saw coming. So the book follows her as she adjusts to her new life in Camelot, as well as her trying to figure out what Merlin saw coming, because he doesn't tell her. That would be way too straightforward for Merlin. Instead, he's just like, oh, you gotta go to the castle, and then he sends her there. And as she's trying to figure out what threat might be coming at Arthur, as she's trying to protect him, she is also figuring out that some of the things that she believes about herself are not true. She's like, oh, I have all these memories of what my life was before this. But then sometimes people will ask her questions about like, what was this like in your childhood? And a lot of times she'll have to lie because people can't know that she's magical. But sometimes she doesn't even have an answer. She'll be like, and no memory will come up to respond. Like sometimes people will ask about like, oh, how did you learn how to do this particular thing? And she's like, yes, I have no memory of learning how to do that particular thing. So she has to be very evasive and figure out why there are all these gaps in her memory. I really loved it. The first couple of pages for me were a little bit hard for me to kind of get into, but I think once you get past that first chapter, it really keeps you going. There's a lot of really interesting stuff to dive into. I loved the magic systems. The one that Guinevere practices the most is called knot magic, and basically she creates knots out of something, thread or hair or like iron threads, that kind of thing, or sometimes even like with her breath in mist, she'll draw something on a glass pane, and then that thing that she drew will borrow some of her energy to maintain the magic. So every time she does a spell, it takes a little bit of energy or something from her. Like there's one point where she uses iron magic, and iron requires blood, so she has to bleed in order to use the magic, and then she can really feel the tug that it's taking on her as long as the magic is in effect. So I thought that was super cool and unique. It was a great start to the series. I haven't read the other ones yet, but I am so excited to. I just picked up the second book today. I can't wait to continue. There's There's just the right amount of twistiness. The characters that we're presented with, I think, are all really interesting. Like, the main cast includes Guinevere, of course, Arthur. We have Guinevere's maid, Brangian, Mordred, who is one of Arthur's knights, and of course, the looming threat of whatever is going to come after Arthur. I thought all of this was presented amazingly. So you have these dual mysteries of what is the threat to Arthur and what is going on with Guinevere, and I thought they were balanced really well. Also, look at how pretty and cool this cover is. Doesn't Guinevere look awesome? I love it. The second book, I'm going to show it to you because I'm just so excited. This is the cover for the second book. And then the third one, the Excalibur Curse, just came out. I didn't pick that one up today because it's still in hardcover and I prefer paperback. We'll see, though, how impatient I get once I finish the second book. The next book that I read that I loved in 2021 was actually a manga, Witch Hat Atelier, Volume 1. I talked about this in a previous video, but I loved this so much. It is so cute and wholesome, but still with danger. Overall, it has like these Studio Ghibli plus magic school vibes. It's about a young girl named Coco who is obsessed with magic. She loves it so much. But in this world, you have to be born a witch, or so she thinks. She sees a witch doing magic and then copies him and then ends up doing a spell herself. Unfortunately, the spell that she does accidentally has some really catastrophic consequences. Because of that, she now has to go with the witch that she saw, who is going to teach her how to use magic so that she can learn how to undo the damage that she's done with the spell that she did. I am so excited to see where this series goes. I think it was such a beautiful first entry. The art style is so cute. Last time I showed it, I showed like a picture of her like freaking out and it was really exaggerated. So let's try this again. Like, look at how cute and good the characters look. I'm just so excited. I finally was able to pick up volume 3 today, which means I'm going to start going through these various manga volumes, and I am incredibly excited. Goes. The magic system also seems really interesting because spells are done with drawing rather than like saying a spell. You draw it, and then how well you draw it is reflected in the way that the spell is carried out. I think that's such a cool magic system. They really get into the details of how each spell works, what the rules are. I absolutely adore that kind of thing, and I can't wait to see more. And the final book that I read in 2021 that I absolutely adored was actually one of the first ones that I read this year, and that is A Deadly Education by Noami Novik. So this is book 1 or lesson 1 of the Scholomance series. This follows Elle, who is a magical student. In this world, all people with magic are chased down by these horrible monsters called Maleficaria because the Maleficaria want to eat them for the magic that they have within them. Usually a lot of these magical children will die because the monsters will come after them and they have no way of defending themselves. So in this world, they have created the Scholomance in order to teach the children how to use their abilities so that they can fight off the monsters. The book picks up in what would be like junior year for our hero, Elle. Her problem is that she has a ton of magical power, but her affinity is destruction. So every time she tries to do a spell or learn a spell, the school gives her something that fits with her affinity, which means she's like, oh, I want something that's gonna warm me up. And the school is like, you want to make a volcano explode. Got it. She can't do small things like magically light a candle or magically clean her room or things like that. She's like, okay, I want a spell to gust away all this dust. And the school is like, oh, you want a devastating tornado. Understood. I thought that was a really funny way to sort of turn around this idea of having great powers is such a good thing and see how it could really be difficult for her. I thought that was great. I think the magic system is really fun. Another thing that I thought was really interesting about this is that the school is, it's called A Deadly Education, and there's a reason. The school is extremely dangerous. So there are no teachers at the school. There's only the students and then the school itself. And there are a whole bunch of wards set around the school to keep monsters out because they can smell the magic and they would swarm at these kids who don't have the ability to fend them off, except for the wards. But even so, they still get in because the wards can only do so much. It's just that these students are safer in here than they are out there, but still not really safe. So a lot of times the students will be murdered by the monsters or sometimes by other desperate students. There are also different types of magic. So you build up mana by how much effort you put into something. So for Elle, she really hates working out. And so she will often do a workout routine in order to build up mana because she's so annoyed that it gets her extra mana when she does that. But there's also like an evil kind of magic that you can build up, and you build that up with murdering people, sacrifices, that kind of thing. But that also takes a greater toll on the body of the person who casts it, as well as being, morally terrible. So the book follows Elle as she tries to get enough power to safely graduate, because graduation is the most deadly thing that can happen to you. During graduation, you have to go to the graduation hall, and that's where all the monsters that couldn't get through to the upper floors are waiting to just devour people as they try to get through the portal that will allow them to go back to regular Earth. One of the things that I loved about the book as well is the relationship that she has with this guy, Orion Lake, who is basically like the golden boy. He's this wonder child who is able to generate mana by killing monsters, and he's really, really good at it. So he'll kill a monster, get more mana, and then he has enough to kill another monster, and it's this crazy feedback loop. So he's like the hero of the school, and he loves killing monsters. But he also suspects that there's something suspicious about Elle. So he starts following her, and he has saved her life a number of times, and it just makes her so mad. And I really love that relationship. I also love the character of Elle. I thought she was really interesting. She's layered, she's nuanced, she's grumpy. These are things that I adore. Like I said, this was book 1. I also read book 2. I enjoyed that a ton as well, and I can't wait for book 3. I think book 1 just took the cake a little bit more because it was introducing us to this world and the series, and that's why I put that instead of The Last Graduate, which is book 2 on here. That said, I could probably evenly give my top 5 to either of them. I loved them both. I loved the character depth that we get in The Last Graduate. I love the world building that we get in A Deadly Education, and I can't wait to see what the conclusion of this series is. Hopefully later this year. I think the third book comes out in September of 2022, which seems like a million years away, but hopefully I will fill it with other really enjoyable books throughout the rest of the year. Let me know what your favorites of 2021 were. If you've read any of these books, if you liked them, if you hated them. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble on about the books that I like. Have a beautiful evening,